So exam question about classification. It says cytochrome C is a protein that is found in all living organisms. Analysis of the amino acid sequence of proteins such as cytochrome C provides data that taxonomists use to produce more accurate classifications. So classifications is grouping organisms based on similarities and differences. Taxonomists are involved in the classification of organisms, and proteins, we're told, are made of amino acids, and the code for protein is found on DNA. It says explain how analysing the amino acid sequence of proteins provides useful data for taxonomists. So we've got to use our scientific knowledge to explain, and we've got to link it to amino acid sequences of proteins and why it will enable taxonomists to group organisms based on similarities and differences. So we can say that first of all what taxonomists do. So taxonomists, they look for similarities and differences. And that's to group organisms into different taxons or species. Groups. So in terms of cytochrome C, if the species are closely related, they'll have similar cytochrome C. Or proteins, or you can say amino acids. We know that DNA codes for these proteins, so if they've got similar proteins, close related species will have similar DNA. So we can say that DNA codes for proteins. More precisely, it's the amino acid sequence. And closely related species will have similar DNA, therefore similar proteins like cytochrome C. If changes have occurred in DNA, for example mutations, some mutations result in changed DNA, then there's going to be more differences in DNA. Therefore, more differences in proteins or cytochrome C, for example. And that means those species, therefore, are not closely related. So not closely. Okay, so that's explaining why amino acid sequencing of proteins is useful to taxonomists. Taxonomists are looking for similarities and differences to group organisms. Closely related species will have similar proteins, for example cytochrome C. We know that DNA codes proteins, so closely related species will have similar DNA. We know that changes in DNA is caused by mutations, therefore that will cause differences in DNA, and the more differences in DNA, there'll be more differences in the proteins, for example cytochrome C, therefore those species will not be closely related. 4 marks.